Well, good evening. I'm Tim Richter. I'm the President and CEO of the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. As our name suggests, our mission is to eliminate homelessness in Canada, but that's becoming increasingly challenging. As you've seen and experienced, and I think probably walking into the theatre today, Canada's under a wave of new homelessness. This crisis has been made exponentially more lethal by the global pandemic and a toxic drug supply. But to give you some sense of the scale of the disaster we're facing, homelessness today is bigger than our largest natural disasters in terms of the loss of housing, and is one of the top 10 in terms of the loss of life. We estimate up to 300,000 people will experience homelessness in Canada this year. That's equivalent to the entire combined population of Coquitlam, New Westminster, Langley, and North Vancouver. Homelessness on the scale we see it today hasn't always existed. It began when government stopped investing in rental housing construction in the early 1980s and eliminated the affordable housing programs in the mid-1990s. Which brings me to the first point I want to make tonight. Homelessness is a housing problem. It's caused by high rent and low vacancy. It is not, and I repeat, it is not caused by mental illness, addiction, poverty, poor choices, or any other personal fault or failing. To illustrate this point, I want you to think about a game of musical chairs, right? I want you to imagine 10 kids around 10 chairs. When the game starts, the first kid to become chairless has a sprained ankle. The next few kids are a bit shy, maybe a bit anxious to play the game well. The next few are smaller than the bigger kids. At the end, a fast, big, confident boy sits victorious in the last available seat. Now, did the kids who lost, did they lose because of a disability? Because of a lack of physical strength? Did they make poor choices in the game? Or were there not enough chairs? Chairlessness, when there are not enough chairs, is the inevitable outcome of this game. Homelessness is caused by a lack of housing, specifically a lack of affordable rental housing. And this lack of housing also drives inequality. Housing scarcity and high cost privileges the privileged. The big, fast, strong, confident white boys will almost always end up with the last chair. If you're interested in learning more, I encourage you to pick up a great book called, wait for it, Homelessness is a Housing Problem, How Structural Factors Explain U.S. Patterns, by American housing scholar Clayton Aldhern and data journalist Greg Colburn. And I assure you the patterns that they discovered in the United States are precisely the same as they are here. But it doesn't need to be this way. Homelessness and our housing crisis are solvable problems. If we're serious about solving homelessness, we have to do two really important things. The first is we need to build affordable rental housing. Second, we need to treat homelessness like the disaster it is and build local response systems modeled on disaster response. To restore affordability in Canada's rental housing markets, and I'd argue in the housing market, we need to build over 2 million units of purpose-built rental housing, including at least 655,000 units of social and supportive housing. By comparison, Canada's only built about 500,000 of those units in the last 30 years. Now, this is a massive undertaking. This is a $1 trillion national project that is way too big for any one government or sector to take on alone. The Canadian Alliance recently partnered with a group called RealPAC, which is a national organization for the commercial real estate industry, and we produced something called the National Housing Accord, which is a multi-sector approach to ending Canada's rental housing crisis. In the Accord, we chart a path out of our housing crisis and some of the ideas you've already heard today. We could have called the document Back to the Future because our 10-point plan proposes all the same basic strategies, or many of the same strategies Canada used before to solve earlier housing crises, like in the 1940s and in the 1960s. And all of it starts with federal leadership. But we also need to treat homelessness like the disaster it is. I'm from Calgary, and in 2013, we experienced a flood that forced 77,000 households out of their homes. In 2016, the city of Fort McMurray, the entire city of 75,000, was evacuated due to a wildfire. How many people in Calgary or Fort McMurray, made homeless by the fire or flood, are still homeless today? None of them. Why? Because in a disaster, there's a local disaster response system in place, a system that is focused on an urgent response to the crisis, keeping people safe, and most importantly, rebuilding and getting people back to their homes. Cities lead, senior government support. There's a command center, there's a plan, an emergency response, data-driven decision-making, and a means of coordination, and a focus on housing. But in most cities, when we're responding to the unnatural disaster of homelessness, we put all of our effort into the emergency response, into shelters, with little or no coordination and little or no focus on housing. We need data-driven, housing-focused homelessness disaster response supported by senior governments in every city in the country. Through Built for Zero Canada, which is a program of the Canadian Alliance, I have the privilege of working with a growing movement of cities, over 50 cities across Canada, using the same strategies as disaster response to end chronic and veteran homelessness. To date, 6 cities have ended homelessness for veterans, 1 has ended chronic homelessness, and 8 are currently sustaining measurable, verifiable, large-scale reductions in chronic homelessness. All of this despite a crushing wave of new homelessness caused by the high cost of housing. Friends, homelessness is solvable. We know what to do and we know how to do it. Homelessness is a choice, but it's our choice to solve it or not. Do we choose to leave our neighbors to suffer and die, or do we choose to build a more equitable and just Canada with housing for all? It's up to us, but I know what I'm going to choose. Thank you.